Hello there. Welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and I hope you're enjoying a lovely weekend. And don't forget to go and get yourself an effervescent sparkling drink or something very warm and comforting, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's continue with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. I was driving my father's beat-up mustard-coloured Mustang down this long dusty road in the middle of nowhere. When I glanced around at the scenery, I didn't recognise where I was, but everywhere I looked there were a plethora of trees and undulating grassy meadows sprinkled with pretty alpine flowers. The day left a vague impression on me that was faint, indistinct, unreliable. I think it was summer. The sky was a pretty cornflower blue, and at first the weather seemed rather unremarkable. By all accounts it was a fine, rather pleasant day, just the way I like it, not too hot nor too cold, the kind of weather where you can keep on your long-sleeved sweater and feel perfectly comfortable all day. Mrs. Thornton, our well-meaning next-door neighbour, was always looking out for us after my mother had died, as almost like a kind of stand-in matriarch figure in my life. She told me that my father's old Mustang was only good enough for the knacker's yard, which was why my father had purchased a brand-new Dodge Journey to replace our old friend, having decided it was time to part ways with the vehicle that had served our family so well. I had always liked that mustard-coloured Mustang. It was easy to grow attached to a vehicle where memories were indelibly imprinted within its aluminium carcass, like oils on a canvas that created a picture that can't easily be washed away, unless someone cruelly paints over it and is desirous to expunge the precious treasured memories, like shredding up a photograph into pieces with little regard. The Mustang for me represented the happy memories of my childhood, my mother sitting in the passenger side seat, my father at the wheel, and me in the back, with my inquisitive little black Scotty Inkaboo, who loved riding around in that car almost as much as I did, possibly more. I could see my mother seated on the passenger side seat, wearing her red velvet beret, and her dark glasses shading her eyes, while a lonely dark curl would slide across her forehead, which she would quickly brush away. She would smile at me. Her lips were always painted in a deep ruby colour, and her skin was always as white as a lily. She would say, "So where shall we go?" as if the world was our oyster, and the choices to where we could travel were endless. That Mustang, much like any other useful car a family might own, had opened up a world of postcard destinations for us that we were privy to visiting together as a family. Now there she was sitting in the driveway, gathering dust, forsaken and forgotten. So I took pity on the battered old car, not just out of the goodness of my heart, I hasten to say, but as a broke student, I had started to use her quite regularly. My father warned me that she wasn't going to last very long, unless good money was finally spent on her to get her back into peak condition, and he didn't believe she was worth the expense. "It's better, son, to save up your money to buy a new truck, but you can use the old girl for as long as you like, until finally she packs up and gives up the ghost." Let's just say the Mustang had an illustrious, colourful history behind it. Many near misses, scrapes, and way too many bumps and bangs to mention. My father was not exactly the most punctilious driver. My mother used to hate him driving, as he'd drive through a red light when there was no traffic around, but my mother believed that no risk, no matter how small, was ever worth taking. One year we went on holiday to the coast, where the beach was bespeckled with bluebottles, and if you were careful, you could make sure you avoided them, but my mother believed the risk of getting stung far outweighed the privilege of swimming in that water. So beach visits were hijacked by the bluebottles indefinitely. To say my mother was not a risk-taker was an understatement. Her motto in life was always to tread carefully. The Mustang had a personality of its own, and always protested grievously when it was taken out for a spin, like an old dog with tired hips that doesn't fancy going out for a walk. It rattled precariously on its wheels, and juddered and shook wherever it went. But for me, its utilitarian usefulness of getting from A to B was absolutely invaluable. even if your insides were knocked and jerked around during the journey, especially when you were travelling down some unforgiving, hostile, dirt-covered roads strewn with potholes, craters, depressions and pebbles. Suffice to say, at this point of my journey, I don't know where I am, as I take this adventurous drive in the middle of nowhere, but I don't get a sense I'm lost. My journey seems purposeful, deliberate, although I'm not sure exactly where I'm going. As usual, the road is very bumpy. No surprises there. In a trice, the weather begins to change, as quickly as the scene on a movie set. I thought it was day a moment ago, but I realise it's now early evening, as when I glance out of the window, my sweeping eyes meet the trees on either side of the road. I notice everything has become ambiguously vague and enigmatically obscure. The sky a gunmetal grey. The world has become like a hazy, indefinite black and white photograph. I see a haunting white mist, steadily rolling towards me. It seems to be sweeping magnanimously over the entire road, so I can't see my way ahead. I drive ever cautiously through this mist. I see the silhouette of a man wearing a bowler hat, moving through the mist. I peer through the window of the windscreen to see the figure more clearly. It's weaving its way towards me, through the white vaporous haze, getting closer and closer to me. It looks like something airily pretentious that you might actually see on a horror movie, when you're opening up to that dreadful scene when the monster emerges through the white clouds that have gathered across the road and then audaciously thunders towards the young man in the Mustang, which of course has to be me. And then you see him, eyes as red as burning coals, and a mouth of sharp, jagged teeth. And then, as you would expect, in this pre-ordered scene of events, he lunges towards me and thrashes open my driver's side window so that the glass shatters all over the road into tiny shards. Then my blood and guts are spilled over the windscreen. This is not what happens, I'm relieved to tell you. The silhouette makes its gainful approach. I realise it's no monster created by Steven Spielberg in one of his fictional movies. Instead, the indeterminate figure resonates with me, with a comfortable familiarity that immediately enables the gathering of tension between my shoulder blades to release their tightness, like a loosened elastic band, and the churning knots of trepidation in my guts to become much more relaxed. I recognise the long, lanky shape of the legs, and the black suit the man is wearing, fitting the contours of his body to perfection. I know unequivocally that this is my father. I would notice his awkward body shape anywhere, as he has always had suits specially made for him by the tailor in town. He has very long legs, and any of the shelf-bought suits you can buy would only end up with the legs midway up the lower calf. I feel a relief wash over me as my father opens the passenger side door and then sits down next to me. "Thank you, son," he says as he sits down on the seat. "You certainly took your time picking me up. I thought you'd never get here." "It's terribly misty," I explained. "I can't see out of the windows with all that mist." "What are you talking about, son? There is no mist." I peer through the windscreen. I'm surprised that my father is right. There is no mist. The evening is clear, the moonlight as bright as a street light. I then realise there's something different about my father. There's a nasty smell connected to him that smells of earth, dust, decaying flesh. Not the smell that I would normally acquaint with him. I'm almost scared to look at him, but I do. I notice his eyes are like marbles, bulging out of his sockets, like loose buttons that are held together by the finest of thread. His face is white, white as a ghost, and his body cracks as he sits down, as if all his crumbling bones have actually broken. They rattle around, much like the Mustang. In that moment of horrifying sober revelation, I realise my father is dead. I don't want him to know that I know he's dead, but it's difficult to keep up the pretense. "Where are we going?" I ask him. "We're going to find your mother, so we can all be together. It's a while since we've seen your mother." "But Dad, Mum's dead," I say. "We can't go and visit her unless we go to the graveyard." It's at this point I wake up with a start. There are beads of perspiration pouring down my face. and I noticed that my sheets are saturated by my own sweat. I realised I'd been dreaming, but it felt so incredibly real, the dream so lucidly vivid. Suddenly my cell phone pings on my nightstand. It sings out its annoying musical trill, which I'm determined to change but have not got around to it. I reach out to grab my phone. I gasp when I see Mrs. Thornton's name on the caller ID. What on earth is that woman, our next-door neighbour, doing phoning me? I've never known her to call me before. Then it dawns on me that something quite dreadful must have happened to my father. Please God, no, are the thoughts that thunder audaciously through my head, like clamorous church bells. I answer my cell in the student apartment I share with 3 other university juniors at the University of Maine. Believe me, I did not want to answer that cell. It became like the monster in the mist I'd seen earlier in my dream. "Hello, Mrs. Thornton," I say, unable to disguise the high level of angst in my voice that makes me sound more like a girl. "Is that you, Simon?" she asks me. Who else did she think it was, I wondered. "Yes, it's me, Mrs. Thornton, Simon. Is everything all right, Mrs. Thornton? Is Dad all right?" I ask. My heart is thundering so loudly in my chest. I can hear every single vibrating beat. I'm so frightened she's going to tell me that my father is dead. I mean, he appeared to me in my dream deceased. Was this some kind of ominous prognostication? Is this what they call a premonition? I can feel my hands are trembling as I reach out to my nightstand to steady myself, like an old man who has stability issues and might just crumble without something or someone to lean on. I've never been so terrified to hear someone's words before. For a fleeting moment I want to hold back the hands of time, or stop the sands in the hourglass from slipping through. I almost want to put a large coal in Mrs. Thornton's mouth, to stop her from talking, almost like a plug in the sink that prevents the water from draining out. I don't want to hear a word of what she has to say. I'm so afraid of what her words might convey. But it's too late. They spill out freely, like the rice from a glass jar. I draw in a deep breath, to brace for impact of her horrifying words that I don't desire to hear, but they don't pack as hard a punch as I was expecting. "Nothing to worry about, son," comes Mrs. Thornton's long drawn-out drawl. "Your father, he had a stroke this afternoon when we were playing bridge together. He was admitted to the hospital an hour ago." "Is he dead?" were the only words that came out of my mouth. I mean, I was sure he was dead. In my dream he had appeared to me as a walking, talking corpse. I was sure that this was a sign. I'd often heard people say to me, I had an ominous feeling that she was dead, and then 5 minutes later the phone rang and my worst fears were confirmed. Was this about to happen to me? A nauseating shiver ran down my spine. Please, dear God, don't let Dad be dead. "Oh, heavens no, Simon. Your father is not dead. He had a stroke. He's doing very well. Fine at the hospital. As fine can be." I was wondering if Mrs. Thornton was telling me the whole truth. Maybe my father was worse than she was making out. People could so easily sugarcoat things. I hate it when they do that. I'd like to know the absolute truth every time. That way you have to put it in your pipe and smoke it, whatever it may be. You don't have a choice to the matter. "Your father wanted you to know he's doing just fine. He doesn't want you to visit him until the weekend. You've got lots of studying to do, he tells me. He doesn't want to interfere with your work. He sends you lots and lots of love and tells you not to worry. He's doing absolutely fine." "Are you kidding me, Mrs. Thornton? Dad's had a stroke. I can't just act like nothing's happened and get on with my studies. I have to be with Dad at a time like this. He needs me. I'm coming right now." I glanced briefly at the time. I had enjoyed an afternoon kip about half an hour ago, when I'd received that lucid dream. But it was now 6 o'clock. There was no time to lose. I needed to get to my father as quickly as possible. But the journey was easily 4 hours away, and that was if I was lucky, without suffering the inevitable hold-ups that can so easily swallow up time. There was a pause on the end of the line,
Are you going to be driving that beat-up Mustang of your father's? I'm not happy with you driving that on the road, Simon. With the greatest of respect, I'm not sure that the thing is actually roadworthy. It's an accident waiting to happen, if you ask me. I would come and pick you up myself, but my truck is in at the dealer's for servicing at the moment. But I could pick you up tomorrow if that's a help. It's kind of you to offer, Mrs. Thornton, I say, but accepting your lift tomorrow is too long a wait for me. I need to see my father as soon as I possibly can. My Mustang has finally broken down, so I shan't be driving it. But I am going to hitchhike to the hospital. It's no big deal. Only 4 hours away. Hitchhike? Says Mrs. Thornton, as if it's an alien word she's never heard before. Now, I don't think that's a good idea. I've got to go, Mrs. Thornton, I say, stopping her flow in mid-sentence. I didn't want to hear the well-meaning woman garrulously prattle on about the dangers of hitchhiking. I was in no doubt that in her repertoire she had a plethora of stories of the horrible things that had happened to people when they hitchhiked, as that woman stored up horror stories like you might collect shells at the beach. I really did not need to listen to her yabbering on and on. She could be like one of those noisy alarm clocks that you could never switch off once she got started. Of course I knew her intentions were good, but it didn't surprise me in the least she'd actually been a school teacher in her younger days. She was so good at telling people what to do. It never occurred to her that she always came across as quite pushy and very opinionated. I could almost visualize her now, sitting on the end of the telephone, shaking her short white curls defiantly, her nose twitching furiously. Why won't that boy listen to me? She was probably thinking. It would be far safer if I picked him up in the morning. But no, that boy is determined, come hell or high water, to visit his dad, even if he rides with the devil himself. Some people will never ever see sense. I will admit Mrs. Thornton had been great to me after my mother had died, devotedly bringing us over some delicious home-cooked casseroles, cornbread and large bottles of her homemade lemonade to enjoy. Yet despite everything, it didn't give her the right to dictate the choices I would make for my own life path. And if I wanted to see my dad right now, wild horses weren't going to keep me away. I'll be in touch, Mrs. Thornton, I say, switching off my cell, so she couldn't call me back, as I knew she would do just that. Mrs. Thornton could be very persuasive when she wanted to be. I could see her making me agree to wait for her in the morning, but that wasn't going to happen. I needed to go to the hospital now. My father was the most important person in my young life, the only real family member I had left after Mum had died. He had always been there for me in life. Now it was my turn to be there for him. I gathered a satchel of essentials for my journey. I put in a quick change of clothes, a torch, my wallet, a packet of beef jerky, a couple of small bottles of Mountain Dew. The whole apartment was swathed with the darkness of early evening. None of the students I shared the apartment with had returned home yet. My bet was they were out on the town, quenching their thirst at a local bar. The kitchen looked like a bomb had hit it. That's the problem with sharing with other men. None of us cared a jot about the condition of the place. Things were much better when Rachel Greenbrier had been living in the apartment with us. She'd kept the place like a sparkling new pin, picking up after us, washing dishes, fastidiously polishing the furniture and shining up the windows. In the end, possibly out of sheer frustration from living with 3 pigs, she'd moved into another apartment. I guess she got sick of cleaning up after us. I can't say I blame her for that. I left a note on the refrigerator, out of courtesy for my flatmates. Dad's had a stroke. Gone to see him. Not sure when I'll be back. We'll be in touch when have more details. Simon. Before long I was ambling down the long asphalt road. I wasn't going to stick out my thumb until I came to a spot where the cars would lightly pass me and offer me a lift. I found trying to hitch a ride in the local town was near impossible, so I didn't even try that approach. When I got to the main road, I stuck my thumb out. Several cars briskly passed me, but someone pulled over to the side of the road, and I climbed into their truck. Thanks, I say, pulling the safety belt over my shoulder. The truck smelt of cigarettes and pee. I found myself wondering whether the old man had a dog that had been peeing around the truck. I hope to God the old man hasn't got a bladder problem, I thought, and it wasn't him that was doing all this peeing. I would have liked to have opened the windows to obliterate the offensive acrid smell, but I didn't want to cause offence. The old man is looking at me with a withered look, a look that I think he wears on his face every single day, almost as if going through life is a challenge for him. There's a melancholia that hangs around him, as pungently as the smell in his truck.
"My name is Duncan Parkinson," he tells me. "And who may you be, young man?" "I'm Simon," I said. "Very, very nice to meet you, young man. So where are you going then?" "I'm going to the hospital. It's 4 hours from here, but I would be very grateful for a lift to the nearest town if you're going that way." "I can do better than that. I can take you halfway. Why are you going to the hospital, if you don't mind my asking?" "My dad. He's had a stroke." Duncan Parkinson looks at me through his piercing blue eyes that were shadowed by a deep sadness. He was very empathetic towards my plight, more so than one would expect from a perfect stranger. "I'm sorry to hear that, son. That's very bad news indeed. Is he going to be all right?" he asks me, rubbing his moustache with one of his hands. He had become stoically reflective, as if telling him about my dad had somehow touched a raw nerve for him. "I believe so, but I'm not sure. I'll only know the truth when I get there. My neighbour, Mrs. Thornton, phoned to tell me that my dad's been admitted to the hospital, but I'm not sure if she's sugarcoating his condition to subdue my concern. She's one of those people that will tell you things are going to be all right, even if they aren't. I remember as a boy I took my sickly canary to her. It was a bright yellow colour. I'd heard she was good with birds. She used to own a parrot. She told me she was going to take care of it for me, that it was going to be absolutely fine. But when she returned my canary to me, it wasn't the same bird. She said to me, 'I told you he would get better.' I guess it died on her, so she surreptitiously replaced it. The irony is she didn't know I already knew it wasn't the same bird." "I know exactly what you mean, son," said the old man ruefully. "To be fair to your neighbour, she was trying to make things better for you by buying you a brand new canary. Personally, I find the nurses at hospitals never ever tell you the truth. When my wife died of a stroke a few years ago, they phoned me to tell me to get to hospital at once, as my wife wasn't well. But when I got there, she was already dead, as cold as ice she was. I knew when they'd phoned me she'd already been dead for quite a long period of time. It made my blood boil, it did. I wondered how long my wife had lain there, dead, before anyone bothered to even notice her condition. If she had just died, her body would still have been warm. They are good at keeping you in the dark in those hospitals, they are. I've been told she was going to be fine, just fine, but she certainly was not. I rue the day I listened to them. I could have been by her side the whole time, when she breathed her last, but I had no idea that she was leaving for good. Not a bloody clue. As like you say, everybody sugar-coated everything. 'Mr. Parkinson,' the doctor said to me, 'your wife is going to do just fine. I've seen this kind of stroke many times before. Most of my patients make a full recovery.' That's what the so-called on-the-ball doctor told me." I could hear the bitter resentment in Mr. Parkinson's voice, and his story made me feel all the more certain that dropping everything for my dad at the last minute was a very wise decision indeed. "I'm very sorry your wife died, Mr. Parkinson. That's terrible. And I'm even sorrier that they made you believe she was going to make a full recovery. That's really bad." "Me too. I suppose, to give them their due, none of them are God. They weren't to know the outcome. I miss her something really bad. My life's never been the same without my Peggy. She was the lighthouse of my life, guiding the way. Now I'm like an old battered ship crashing against the rocks in tumultuous conditions, always losing my way without her. It's like I've lost the very best part of myself, you know. I wish to God it had been the other way round, I really do, and that I had gone first. She would be much better at navigating this life without me than I am without her.
My wife was a survivor. Me, well, I barely get through each day. I think you're being hard on yourself. You look like you're doing well to me, Mr. Parkinson. Kind of you to say so, son. Kind of you to say. But believe me, I've looked better. I used to walk for 3 hours a day, you know. I was as fit as a fiddle. But after Peggy's death, I sank into a deep depression. I became like a sagging mattress that has lost all its bounce. But let me stop prattling on about me. I'm worried about your father's stroke, son. I really am. I do hope he will make a full recovery. Many do, you know. My wife was one of the unlucky ones. But then she never did herself any favours. Smokes like a chimney, she did. She was very overweight. She had all the red flags that warn you about high blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes. The doctors told her to give up smoking and to lose weight, but easier said than done. My wife just couldn't do it. He turns to me briefly. Your father, is he a smoker, son? A tad overweight, perhaps? He asks me, raising a brow, expecting me to confirm his bold assumptions. No, my dad's very slender. I've never considered him to be unhealthy. He's thin and gangly, very long legs. If the truth be told, not exactly the kind of candidate you would expect to get a stroke. That doesn't mean a thing, son. You can be slender and unhealthy on the inside. It's called being internally fat. Did he have high blood pressure? Did he smoke? Those are questions you need to ask yourself. He smoked cigars. But that doesn't count, does it? I mean, they're not the same as cigarettes. Oh, but they are. There you are, then. He smoked. Not good. Cigars are as bad as cigarettes. Could be worse, even. I'm a fine one to point a finger, I am. Look at me. I smoke like a chimney. You can probably smell it. I'm sure my truck doesn't smell too good. You can open a window if you like. I'm afraid my dog does tend to pee in the truck as well. I hope you can't smell that. She would be in the truck tonight with me, but I left her at the house today. She seems to think she needs to mark everything with her pee. I took her to the greengrocer's recently to pick up some vegetables for the stew I was cooking. She walked up to the greengrocer, lifting her leg up on him, peeing over his trousers, in the calf area, of course. Never been so embarrassed in all my life. But that greengrocer's a good man. He didn't even bat an eyelid. He said to me, "It's official. Your dog really likes me, Mr. Parkinson." I opened the window to allow some fresh air into the truck, gulping the fresh air with relief. That bad, son. I do apologize profusely. I get used to the smell, I'm afraid. I'm quite sure my house stinks as bad as this. My Peggy, if she was alive, she would have house-trained that dog of mine. Good and proper, she would have.
I was sad to say goodbye to Mr. Parkinson when he dropped me off halfway to my destination. He was reluctant to see me go, and even had in mind to take me the whole way to the hospital because of my father's stroke. I refused him kindly, and was ever grateful to be out in the fresh air again, away from the unfortunate stench of his truck. I think that dog of his has anointed every part of his truck with his pee, as it had reeked to high heaven of ammonia, only slightly overshadowed by the cigarette smoke. I wasn't sure what was worse, the cigarette smoke or the pee. They were both quite caustic to the back of my throat. I'd never hitched a lift at this time of the night before, but I knew I needed to get on to the well-travelled road before I stuck out my thumb again. I was suddenly feeling exhausted and drained as I walked down the pavement. That was when I noticed a graveyard on one side of the road, and under the dancing shadows of an ethereal moon, it seemed quite beguiling, almost as if it was calling me. I suddenly had a brilliant idea. What harm would it do for me to rest in the graveyard for just 20 minutes before I proceeded on my way again and stuck my thumb out for another lift? My father had always taught me growing up that one of the greatest secrets to success was regular kips. I found that they had always served me well. From a young age I'd learnt to take a kip here and a kip there, sometimes in the most unlikely of places, but it had never bothered me. I'd once slept in a friend's bathtub with blankets and a pillow, and it was one of the best cat naps I'd ever had in my life.
These short sleeps had helped me to study better for exams and get great results. I had learnt to listen to my body. My father told me that the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, who'd been the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom for a long period of time, claimed it was her cat naps that would take her through the day, helped her mind to remain sharply focused. It was the quintessential secret to some of the sharpest minds of our day, my father had told me. Right now my languid body was telling me it was jaded, fatigued, very drained. I surrendered to its dogged demands. I never argued with my body. I wasn't worried about taking a kip in a graveyard just for 20 minutes. I know a lot of people might find that strange, but it really didn't bother me. A 20-minute delay was not going to kill me, one way or the other. I was not a superstitious person. I didn't believe in ghosts and ghoulies, or strange things that go bump in the night. And growing up, I'd never ever been afraid of the dark. On the contrary, I enjoyed the darkness. It reminded me of a cool, soothing room, where the curtains are drawn, a tranquil sanctuary that invited sleep and relaxation, a private, harmonious place to be alone with your thoughts. I thought the graveyard was a peaceful, secluded place, where I could happily lay down my head on the grass, along with the deceased souls of the dead, that rested in this placid cemetery. I would be in good company, I thought. I'd always found cemeteries interesting, somnolent places, and enjoyed visiting my mother's grave with my father after her death. It was always a tranquil experience. In truth, I never sensed my mother's presence in that graveyard, but I never told my father that. It might have upset him. He would regularly visit my mother's grave, to feel close to her every Tuesday without fail. That's when he'd deliver a fresh bunch of flowers to her gravesite, as regular as clockwork. I knew that on this coming Tuesday, my mother's gravestone would unlikely to be blessed with some fresh flowers, unless my father was released from hospital, but I thought that that would be exceedingly unlikely. Still, miracles happen, and I was certainly banking on one. The graveyard was closed, as the wrought iron gates were held together tightly with a thick iron chain and padlock, but it would be easy to climb over that wall. The quaint, charming stone wall fringing the edges of this private cemetery was the kind of wall you might see in the Highlands in Scotland, or a quirky English country village. I had seen enchanting walls like this when I went to stay with my father's mother in Scotland for the summer holidays when I was 12 years old, and this stone wall brought back wistful, nostalgic memories for me. I had navigated my way over many of them in Scotland, and I could do so now. The moonlight serenely rested on the roof of the sky, like a solitary rounded light, and its silvery prisms danced over the stone walls and dappled the rounded gravestones of the cemetery in a gossamer illumination that gave the graveyard a spectral, phantasmic appearance. But that did not concern me. I climbed over the wall, throwing my satchel onto the ground below, with a loud walloping thump, and with the light of my torch I cruised across the graveyard, which was well maintained with a manicured lawn, neat flower beds, and perfectly preserved granite tombstones. But the ones in the furthest corner of the cemetery were gnarled, decayed, tarnished, old, covered with moss and lichen. They were so weathered and so bronzed that the names of the souls had long since departed, been washed away by the hands of time. With my flashlight I navigated my way through the cemetery, wondering where I would lay down my head. The weather was perfect. It was a warm night, with only a hint of a breeze that nudged my cheeks very gently. I could smell the freshly mown grass as I meandered towards a gravestone that was nestled under the protective awning of a cherry blossom tree. I sat down on the ground, opening a bottle of Mountain Dew, and thirstily knocked back the whole bottle without drawing breath. I couldn't believe how thirsty I was. I curiously read the inscription on the stone. I decided this was the spot where I would enjoy my catnap. I read the name on the gravestone, Sidney Holloway, 1930 to 2001, and the note on the granite slab read, "Reader, beware. As you pass by, as you are now, so once was I. As I am now, so you will be. Therefore prepare to follow me." Wow, I thought, reading the inscription on the stone. The message made my blood run cold. I didn't fancy the idea of ending up under the ground any time soon.
So there we are, that's the end of part 1. Part 2 is tomorrow night, and it's a very exciting story, so I'll see you back then. Good night, and sleep tight.